the High Necromancer is dead. And as a fellow practitioner of the magical arts, it only seems fair that you're the one to claim all the gems and artifacts in their dungeons. That said though, this game is called Wizards & Co., not just Wizard, as you'll be duking it out with the other wizards at the table to see who can get the most loot. So, grab your minions, organize them, and try to outmaneuver your opponents, and hopefully you'll end up with the most loot and the least cursed treasures in this Roll for Crit review. The game in this video was provided to Roll for Crit by its creators or publishers. Only the game was provided for the making of this video. In Wizard & Co., you will play as a wizard who's taking advantage of a necromancer's death in order to loot their dungeons of all their precious artifacts and gems. However, you are not the only wizard who's thought of this idea, so you're going to have to send your minions in there to not only claim the treasures, but fight off those pesky opponents of yours. Now, in this game, there'll be multiple dungeons based on player count. However, we're just showing one here as it will get the idea across. And each player will have a deck of cards. These will actually consist of the exact same cards for all players. And while there are some more advanced monsters that you can swap in as you decide if you all want to play with, like the Gorgon, for example, they do have a basic suggested setup for most games. Now, on your turn, you're going to play those cards into one of the dungeons on the board. Now, you have to play a card if you have cards in hand, otherwise you'll skip straight to the draw phase. When you play a card, you can either play it face up or you can play it face down. There are many different reasons why you'll want to do this. Obviously, keeping it face down keeps it hidden until you go into the battle step, but some cards, such as the Titan, or in this case, this Ogre, require to be played face up for their ability to trigger. The Ogre, for example, can be played in a space that is occupied, forcing it to move to another location. Speaking of locations, each dungeon has these open areas. You can only place where there are those open sort of stairways with lights. For example, that area is closed off. And with the exception of the Ogre here, you have to play into an area that is free. Some of these areas have gems in front of them, including these cursed gems. These are bad. They're going to hurt you if you get too many of them by the end of the game. You have the chance to earn these depending on if you survive the battle. Scrolls add a unique rule to each dungeon, so make sure you read them carefully. After you played all your cards, you're then going to enter the draw step. Here, you're going to draw cards based on how many cards you played this turn. If, for example, you didn't play any cards or only played one card face up, you're actually going to get to draw 2 cards. However, if you're greedy and not only if you played 2 cards, but if they were in the same dungeon, you won't draw anything. By the way, if you do play 2 cards, one of them will always have to be played face up. After you've drawn your cards, you're going to look, like this here, if a dungeon has been filled. If so, you are going to enter the battle step. First, the player who filled the dungeon, in this case, the red player, is going to get this token. This is basically to mark that they're the one who filled the dungeon and will be used for other things such as tiebreakers. Then, you're going to flip every card face up. This means you now know what's going to be at the dungeon, and basically, starting from this statue here and going in the order of the sword it's pointing in, you're going to trigger the actions there, which could in turn actually remove cards on the board before they get the trigger. So, for example, first up is the Hobrunner. This one actually will move to another dungeon if you so choose. In this case, it's probably for the best as the green player looks like it's outnumbered and it's in front of a cursed gem symbol, which is probably not the best idea for it. Then keep going, and then some cards like the Hobblobber here as well as the Earth Imp may actually eliminate or stun monsters, usually based on a specific type, which you can see in the corner. However, the Earth Imp, for example, is going to look at monsters adjacent to it, looking for the beast type, which neither of them are. If there were one, the monster, since it's a stun, would go back to the owner's hand. The Hobblobber, on the other hand, eliminates all giants in this dungeon regardless of its position. So, once we go around clockwise, this will trigger later. This triggers but nothing, doesn't do anything. Nothing happens. The Hobblobber then is going to kill the Ogre and the Titan. Bad for the blue player and pretty hurtful for the red player. Eliminated cards are actually put to the bottom of your deck. Then this red imp is going to allow it to draw 2 cards. And now you're going to look at the results of the battle and see who's left standing. For each card in front of a gem slot, that player is going to collect that gem. So in this case, the yellow player is going to collect a white and a cursed gem, which isn't that great. While the red player, even though they initially had a red card over here, is only going to collect a yellow gem. Then you're going to calculate strength to see who gets to loot those artifacts first. Now, strength can vary. For example, the imps will actually have a strength equal to the number of imps in the dungeon. So in this case, there are 3 imps. So each of those imps are going to get 3 regardless of who they belong to. So right now, the red player has a strength of 6, while the yellow player has a strength of 4. So they're going to get first dibs at those artifacts. The scroll will go to whoever completed the dungeon, regardless if they still had monsters there. In this case, it still is the red player. That'll be worth a point at the end of the game. Now, there are many different kinds of treasures that can be coming out. Some of them, like this one, will trigger at the end of the game. This one is an equipment. You'll put it on a monster when you place one out, usually giving some kind of bonus or additional action. Then, even if the card is eliminated or stunned, you still will have the artifact returned to you. Finally, though, there's one other treasure I want to talk about, and that's creature treasures. There are some creatures that are set aside for all players, but whoever claims this treasure is going to be able to take the copy of the card it is referencing and add it to your hand. Only you will now have control of a void dragon, for example, allowing you to have a bit more uniqueness, as well as a pretty cool strong card to play every now and then. After the dungeon has been completely looted, then you're going to take all the cards that were still there, putting them on the bottom of your deck in any order, meaning that you may be able to draw those cards at a much later date. Now, if there are any scrolls set aside at the beginning of the game still out, you're going to flip over the dungeon, take one of the scrolls, adding it to the board where it'll have a new rule for you to play, as well as some new treasures for people to loot. If there were no more scrolls left and a dungeon gets cleared out, then instead of refilling it, that dungeon will be removed. You will keep playing with any other dungeons remaining, and then once all dungeons have been cleared out, you will enter the scoring phase. Now, let's say this is what the red player was able to claim as their loot while playing. Now, before you do scoring, there's going to be 2 things you're going to need to do. First, the treasures that have that end of game symbol you're going to do, they usually mean gaining some extra gems, possibly losing some of the cursed gems. That's important because next, you're going to count up how many cursed gems each player has. Whoever has the most automatically loses 3 points before they add up anything. Then, regardless of who that player was, for every cursed gem you have, you're going to lose 1 gem along with the cursed gem. So they also take away from your sets. Finally, though, you can add up your points. First, let's go with a bit more of the easier stuff. Each scroll is going to be worth 1 point. Treasures, based on their color, will either be worth 7 for gold, 5 for silver, or 3 for bronze. Finally, gems are going to score based on sets. There is a bit of a chart, but basically, the more gems you have, the bigger the set. So in this case, having 5 out of the 6 gems is going to earn you 9 points, while this set of 2 will only give you 2 points. Add these all up, and whoever has the most is the winner. If there's ever a tie, whoever has the battle token last is going to be declared the winner. So this game is a bit of set collecting, trying to get a lot of loot, but really the core mechanic is all about trying to outmaneuver, think what your opponent's playing in each area, and see if you can outsmart them. That's actually really nice with how everyone, 1, has the exact same cards in their deck, but 2, they're really built under a sort of rock, paper, scissors style of gameplay. All the cards belong to a certain creature type, and there's always at least 1 card that usually says, as you saw, kill all the giants or stun all the beasts adjacent to you. Because of this, there's a lot more give and take in trying to think what cards opponents can play. And if you saw someone play that card that maybe takes out a specific type, you know that maybe in a different dungeon, you may feel a bit more safe. There are also some more advanced cards, and you can throw them in too. They add some more weird stuff, but my 2 favorite ones are the ones that actually add abilities that you can drop in. This is a small thing, but the one problem I have with their basic list, which I actually think is pretty fine for the most part, is if a card has an ability that triggers when you play it, you don't get it if you played it face down, meaning that you have to reveal it so people can see what it is in order to get that power. And in their basic list, the 2 cards that do that are, one is just can't be played face down, and the other is the giant, which I do really like, but I do like adding in those few extra cards in there to add that choice of whether it's better to stay hidden or play for its power. Regardless, though, like I said, the basic setup, I think actually those cards are pretty good. It gets the idea across. It lets everyone know not too complicated. It's just the typings, and you know, like whether something is designed to take out another type or give you a bonus. And because everyone is playing with the same cards, barring the ones you earn from a treasure, you can start thinking like, all right, I know he played this card there, and I feel like that one's over there, so maybe I can risk playing my card over here. Or if you don't feel comfortable, maybe there's a way you can kill that card first or move it, like I did earlier, with the giant. In terms of making it a bit more unique, for example, we brought up the monster treasures. Those are also cool. I mean, come on, having a unique special monster that's just yours, who doesn't like that idea? But the equipment themselves are also really cool. They're actually really nice. Some of them are specific, like they'll give this bonus if it's a beast. So you can make your beast card strong or put on a card that's face down. Everyone thinks you played a beast there, and it turns out to be a bluff. So I think they actually add a lot to trying to trip up your opponents. And of course, they add points at the end. But honestly, I was always much more interested in what they brought to the table for their abilities rather than, at least not until maybe the last dungeon, how many points they would add to my final score. The one problem, though, that both the artifacts and the monsters bring is their symbology. Now, plenty of board games may make the choice to add symbols instead of words. It makes it easier if you try to translate this. Your minions will actually have both, so they'll show a symbol, and then they'll also say, like, this lets you stun the monsters adjacent to you. That said, the artifacts don't have that. And this could be easily solved in most cases with a nice player aid, whether it's one given to each player or maybe one on the back of a rulebook or a separate sheet that just shows every symbol and what it means. Instead, here, they have every card and artifact listed in the back of the rulebook and just tells you what it does. And that is nice, but it's a little bit better when you just have like one page people can glance at to know, okay, that symbol means protection, or this symbol means on play, or when we're going around during the battle phase, rather than being like, all right, what specifically does the ancient scepter do? And that really slowed down the game in a way I really didn't like, especially obviously earlier on. But even then in later games, because, sometimes you just want to recheck the wording and it's a little bit easier if there's just a symbol. I just wish they had spent that extra sheet, whether it's giving all the players. The back of the rulebook just had a piece of art. I really think that was, if you're going to go symbols, give us something where we can glance and know what the symbols mean. Yes, it's nice to know what all the cards actually do specifically, but it's the reason we do symbols is to make things more general and easier and quick to read, not to just, I don't know, look pretty. That said, the one other thing that was a little bit clanky was the drawing system. I mean, any game that has a lot of different ways to get points, your point salad style game is going to have a little bit of clunk there when scoring, and that's fine. It's just the nature of the beast. But here, the more problem I had in terms of the clankiness came down to drawing. It was sort of like a weird rule of like, if you played this one card, if it's face up, you draw 2. If it's face down, you draw 1. If you play 2, you draw 1. If you play 2, but they were in the same place, they draw 0. If you have a card, you have to play a card. But if you don't have any cards and you don't draw, then you draw 2. It's a lot of like, if A, then B, then B, then C, then C, then D, then drawing, instead of just a simple play 1 card, draw 1, play 2 cards, draw 0. Because of the up and down. Basically, it's slowed down the game once again. And that's really, I think, the biggest problem overall with this game is not that I didn't like how the mechanics meshed, but because of the lack of the player aid and mostly the draw step. I'm not going to really count the different ways you can score points because that just feels like strategizing. I did feel the game trips over itself at times, which helps lose the pace and maybe get players a bit more confused and making sure they're just following things rather than getting really engaged and, trying to mess with each other. Because whenever you actually had the battles, those were great. It was really fun to go around with the cards and see what everyone revealed. And you're like, oh, I forgot about that card. And then all of a sudden, they wipe out your entire plan. And then you end up accidentally with 3 cursed gems. And now you're like, okay, there's only 2 scrolls left. I got to find a way to get rid of these cursed gems because right now I'm ahead by 2 and I don't want to lose those 3 points and also lose more gems. If there was a way to streamline it just a little bit more, then the game can shine on what it's trying to do. And that is to have you backstab everyone else at the table. And hopefully you're the one who comes out on top with all the really nice components, the nice little gems, that you can get different scrolls, the different treasure chests. And it always was a surprise at the end because you're like, oh, right, you actually had 3 golden chests. I didn't add that in. And you got 2 more gems and stuff. I really did enjoy when this game is on full blast, when you're playing cards, thinking about what to play, feeling great about what you played and outmaneuvering your opponents, or the shock when you realize they played different cards or you forgot about a certain card and all of a sudden the dungeon goes in a completely different direction at the end game scoring than what you expected. But for the first few games and even afterwards, you're probably going to be tripping up a bit more over your own shoelaces, basically just trying to understand the rules and make sure you understand what each card and artifact token actually does. Crits and misses for Wizards & Co. Crits. Whether you choose to throw in the advanced cards or use their basic setup, I love the design of the deck of cards and how you play with it, in both the sense that every player plays with a symmetrical deck, as well as that the discarded cards are actually put on the bottom of the deck instead of their own pile. What this does is give players enough information knowing every card someone could possibly be playing with, but without that face-up revealed discard pile, you'll never be 100% sure of what your opponents can play against you. I think that their standard setup is perfectly fine. That said, they do give you extra cards that you can swap in with cooler, more interesting abilities. For me personally, I prefer throwing in the cards that triggered as soon as you played them, as they force you to decide whether that power is better than playing the card face down. There's also the treasure monsters you can get, which were always awesome, as it meant only you could use that unique monster, which gave you a very powerful boss monster for the rest of the game. Misses. A lot of the game has both symbols and the text explaining the symbols on the components, though the artifacts only had the symbols. Now, usually this wouldn't be any kind of problem at all, as there'd be a player aid or a cheat sheet for you to quickly look at to know what each symbol meant. However, instead of doing that, they only have every card listed in the back of the rulebook, explaining in detail what it does, which is nice if you need an exact ruling or wording to know how something interacts. However, while the game is actually being played, it is a bit nicer to have a much simpler symbol guide that you can quickly glance at that tells you what each symbol means. Even if you ignore the first miss, the game can trip over itself sometimes with how the rules work, with how many cards you draw, and what gems get removed and added, and then counting up points, because this is a point salad game. So there will be moments of hiccups or maybe some dead space when you're just trying to make sure that you're following all the rules correctly. Odds are, if not already, I bet someone will already has made a supplemental sheet of the symbols that probably you can download on Board Game Geek. If not, I highly recommend you make your own. That alone will speed up this game and help fix up really a lot of the problems I had here. I liked playing the cards. I liked seeing all the different abilities on the scrolls that changed up the dungeons. I just didn't like it when I had to stop and go into the rule book to read again of what that actually means. Because just like any game, when you have to stop to basically make sure things are working, that's when the game is at its weakest. And if you have to do multiple stops, not because you feel like there's some crazy, weird niche combo, but rather just because it's just what could easily be solved with a sheet of printed paper. If you get that sheet, I think it fixes a lot of the problems. Yes, there's still a little bit of clunkiness, but if you don't have to go and flip through every page and look at the exact name of an artifact or creature to know what it does, it's going to make sure the game goes much more smoothly, and less interruptions makes, well, any game better. But you can let me know if you've tried this out, what your thoughts on this are. Maybe did you already print out a sheet and did that help out? Or maybe you think I'm being a bit too nitpicky. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. But for now, I'm Will, and this has been Roll for Crit.